Hey there, this is Natalie, and since my last video about Return by Death, I've been having some more thoughts about how it actually could work. That video does have spoilers for ReZero Arcs 5, 6 and 7, but this one isn't going to. So if you're anime only, this video will contain some information you might not know from the anime, but shouldn't spoil any later plotlines or revelations. Now, we know that Subaru's Return by Death is an authority that was granted to him by Satella, or the Witch of Envy. It wasn't shown in the anime, but in the source material, it was established when Satella showed up at the witch's tea party that Satella and the Witch of Envy are actually separate personalities, and can be considered different people. But we don't really know what their connection to Subaru is, why they love him, or why they gave him Return by Death. Because Satella is the source of this ability then, it's normally assumed that she decides what Subaru's save points are, and is kind of watching him and manually updating them as he goes, in response to him finding a way past certain obstacles or reaching certain important milestones in what he's trying to do. We can assume she's aware of what he's doing because she reacts when he tries to talk about Return by Death. But what I want to consider in this theory is that Satella doesn't actually choose the save points herself, so that she doesn't actively decide when Subaru will be sent back to each time she sees him after his deaths, or when to update his save point. I think it's quite possible that she doesn't have the power to do this, and that instead, the authority itself decides the save points based on a set of rules and some kind of predictive ability that responds to causality. It would be a subtle difference, but it would mean that Satella has a lot less control over things, and that she herself may not have liked some of the save points Subaru ended up with. If the authority worked like this, it would aim to meet certain conditions, so would choose a moment in time where, based on causality, Subaru's death is not currently inevitable, meaning he still has an opportunity to change the future. Like falling into a black hole, there's always a point where basically all routes lead to doom, and something that could predict what was already inevitable at any point in time would be able to choose a point before Subaru dying became unavoidable. It's basically choosing based on avoiding dead ends. Now, Satella herself probably wouldn't be able to make those kinds of predictions. We're talking about being able to analyse every possible outcome to determine if there are any ways Subaru can survive here at different moments in time. She's powerful, but she's not a supercomputer, or, as far as we know at least, all-knowing. But we do know of which technologies in ReZero that absolutely could do this, because we know about Echidna's Tome of Wisdom and the Gospels. The Tome of Wisdom was invented by Echidna, but it does things she can't actually do herself. It basically knows everything. It can also predict the future in a way that does seem to adjust as things change in general. We know this because of Roswaal's Gospel. Roswaal's Gospel is derived from Echidna's Tome of Wisdom, and he's been using it to tell him what to do for 400 years, up until Ram basically destroys it, as we saw in Season 2. We know that because of Subaru returning by death, different things have happened in different loops, yet the instructions in Roswaal's Gospel always still make sense to him, so it must adapt its predictions, again based on causality, rather than there being just one scripted destiny that it knows. Because the Echidna who gave Roswaal and Beatrice their Gospels is dead, and the Echidna, Subaru and Emilia encounter clearly isn't sending updates to Roswaal's Gospel either, it is the Tome of Wisdom itself that has this kind of power, rather than updating the Gospel being something Echidna actively does. But it is guiding Roswaal towards outcomes that we can assume Echidna herself wants, so the conditions it works to seem to have been defined by her. If all of this sounds a lot like magic-powered AI, then I think that's intentional. Tappei Nagatsuki, the author of ReZero, also wrote Vivi, which is literally about AIs changing the future, And I do have a video about how Vivi incorporates fairly realistic AI issues from real computer science into the story, which suggests it was something Tappé already had an interest in or had researched a lot to write about. He seems to favour taking that kind of logic to extremes over vaguer magical explanations for things, so it certainly wouldn't be strange for him to want to apply the same kinds of rules and capabilities that an AI would have to something in a magical setting, like an authority, rather than to simply say, well, Satella can just do all of this herself because she's a witch. There are a few examples that support the idea that the save point is picked somewhat programmatically to meet certain conditions. One example is the very short loop we saw at the start of Season 2, where Subaru kills himself after finding out that Rem has been eaten. In the anime, this was changed a bit, probably just to have Subaru going to the battlefield because it was more visually dramatic, and when he killed himself he returned to the carriage with Emilia. In the source material, he actually killed himself by Rem's bedside and was taken back to the same room just moments before. This is the only time we see Subaru commit suicide when he isn't already entrenched in a series of events that had become unwinnable. That is, if we assume the win conditions that the authority is working to only consider Subaru's survival, not him achieving everything he personally wanted to. Subaru here is in no danger whatsoever, and the time it takes to make a different decision that would prevent the death he just experienced is pretty much zero, because he just needs to decide there's no point in killing himself. So the nearest point in time that would meet the conditions the authority would be searching for was literally right before he decided to die. But it does also seem to factor in upcoming events, at least as far as Echidna theorises in the Greedif. At least in the original web novel version. I haven't read all of the newer light novel version. So, without spoiling the Greedif, because I did say this would be spoiler free, there is a point where Subaru discovers his checkpoint has updated, and just as in the case by Rem's bedside that I just talked about, Subaru is, at that time in the story, safe and not involved in anything that should immediately kill him. Echidna suggests that the save point seems to update before something important happens, and she wonders what it could be. We actually don't find out, because this is right at the end of the story. But for it to be able to do that would suggest future predicting abilities being a part of Return by Death's save point setting logic. Now, if you've read the later arcs and can think of some loops where this logic doesn't seem to apply, then that's kind of what was covered in my last video, so check that out if you haven't already. But otherwise, what do you guys think about this? Do you agree that it's Return by Death itself that sets the save points, based on conditions chosen to meet Satella's goals, or do you think Satella is actively choosing to update them throughout the story? Let me know in the comments. Thanks as always to my supporters on Patreon, and to everyone who supports my channel and watches my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.